Hello mini pilots, my name's Paul Tace. In this video we're going to see how to make these seamless transitions. And to do this we're going to need ND filters. And below I have a link to some ND filters that I use all the time, which I believe are very good value. For more information on them you can click the link in the top right hand corner or in the description down below. And this will take you through to my video on how to use these ND filters and why I like these ones in particular. In this video I'm going to take you through how to choose your ND filter, what settings we're going to want to use, go over some basic planning, and we're going to look at what works well and what doesn't quite work. So this first section is going to be how to plan your shot, the second section is going to be how to shoot the shot, and the last section is going to be how to edit it. So let's get started. So basically what we're trying to do is finish with a blurred movement and then start the next shot with a very similar blurred movement. Now the easiest way I found to do this is to shoot directly down at 90 degrees, and then once we finish shooting, move forward and flick the gimbal up. This is going to create a lot of blur. Now at the beginning of the next shot, we start facing down and again flick the gimbal up whilst moving forwards, and then we continue to shoot and move forwards. One reason this works so well is because when we're outside, the ground is usually going to be the same colour in different locations. So in this example, the grass is green and brown at the end of the first location, and at the beginning of the next location, it's easy to find some very similar looking grass. So when we blur it using the gimbal motion, the end of the first shot should look very similar to the beginning of the second shot. Now it's important when we're doing this to remember to carry on the same motion. For example, if I'm moving forwards and flicking the gimbal up, I want to start the next shot the same way. Now if I want to be flying backwards and flick the gimbal down, it's important to remember at the beginning of the next shot, I want to continue the same way, moving backwards and flicking the gimbal down. So when we're planning our shot, it's just important to remember we want the same colours at the end of the first scene as the beginning of the second scene. We also obviously want to shoot in manual and make sure we keep it set at the same exposure to make sure that all our footage afterwards matches perfectly. And we also want to make sure we're blurring it in the same direction to make sure the two scenes fit together nicely. Another thing to bear in mind is we want as much gimbal movement as possible, as this will create more blurred footage. The more blurred footage we have, the easier they will be to connect together. So that's it for the planning stage. Next we're going to look at the settings. Now when you're shooting, you want to be shooting at a fairly slow shutter speed. I usually shoot these transitions at 1/25 or 1/30th of a second. On this particular day when it was overcast, I used an ND4 filter to make sure I could achieve this. So what I'll do is I'll set the Mavic Mini to 1/30th of a second, and then I'll make sure I've got the right ND filter to get the correct exposure. I also want to change the gimbal to make it faster and less smooth. So to do this, I go into the menu, go to Control, and then scroll down to Advanced Gimbal Settings. From there, I put the pitch speed up to 100, and I drop the smoothness down to 0. This means as soon as I lock on the wheel, I'll get the maximum amount of blur. Now I usually shoot in 24 frames a second, but obviously if you want to shoot in slow motion, you can change it to suit you. Next, I'll usually put the Mini in sports mode. This means I can fly slowly if I want to, and then where I want the extra speed for motion blur, I can push the sticks a lot faster. However, sometimes I did find it easier to shoot in smooth mode, and then just use the gimbal only to get the motion blur. This will change situation to situation, and you'll have to do what works for you. For my first shot of the opening sequence, I was shooting in sports mode. I moved forward slowly, and at the end sped up and flipped the gimbal upwards. Now for the second shot, I decided to shoot in smooth mode. This is because I wanted the gimbal flicking up at the beginning, and again flicking up at the end. I found it really difficult to do this in sports mode, so smooth mode really made this a lot easier. For the final shot, I set this again to sports mode. I lined the camera up with me before I started, so I knew I could flip the gimbal up to 0%, and then carry on moving smoothly. Again I had it set in sports mode, because I wanted to move slowly at the beginning, and then go faster as I lifted up. And once we have all our clips, it's time to edit it. Now to show you how to edit this, I'm going to do this in DaVinci Resolve, but you can do this in any program, and actually I'd probably prefer to do this in Premiere Pro. So what I've got here are the 3 files I want to use, and I've dropped them into the media pool. I'm then going to click on the editing tab down the bottom. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the first piece of footage, and I'm going to use my mouse to drag this little white line backwards and forwards to find out where I want the first clip to start. Now once I've decided where I want to start, I'm going to press I to mark it in. And then once I know where I want it to finish, I'm going to press O to mark it out. Then once I've done that, I'm going to drag it down onto the timeline. Lovely. Next, I'm going to go to the second piece of footage, and again, I'm going to find where I want it to start. I'm going to press I to mark it in, and then press spacebar to play it through. And then I'm going to press O to mark it out. Then once I've got this, I'm going to drop this down next to it on the timeline. So now we have this. So I know this isn't perfect yet, but we're going to sort this out later. Next, I'm going to go to the last piece of footage, and again I'm going to find where I want it to start. I'm going to press I to mark it in, and I'm going to press play to watch it through, and then press O to mark it out again. From here, I'm going to drag this down onto the timeline, and now we've got our 3 clips next to each other. And this is what they look like. Now, as we can see, these still aren't very smooth transitions, and we've got a little bit of work to do. So the next thing we need to do is go back to the transition we need to edit, then hold over it and see what's wrong. Now, as we can see, this frame here is fairly sharp, so I'm going to press the right arrow key, go through to a blurred part, and then press B to cut, A to select, and delete to delete. This will put the 2 blurred frames together. I'm then going to go and grab a cross-dissolve transition, make it a small one, and then I can play through. So I'm going to do the same on the second one. I'm going to go back and find out why this isn't smooth, and obviously we don't want all the trees in the background with the white sky, so I'm going to press B to cut that out, A to select, and delete to delete, and then we should have the 2 blurred scenes next to each other. From here, I'm going to go to the top left hand corner, grab the cross dissolve transition, and then make it smaller by dragging the edges in. And there we have a transition. Now this one's not perfect, and that's because I couldn't get enough blur when I flicked the gimbal up to connect with the second scene well. But this is the best I can do, and it's not terrible. But in the future, I'm going to make sure I have the gimbal down 90 degrees and then flick it up to 0 degrees to get the maximum amount of blur I can. Now the next thing I'm going to want to do is to add a sound effect. Now what I've done is I've gone into the YouTube audio library and I found this sound effect. Now this one's called Rake Swing Whoosh Close, and it sounds like this. So now I'm going to drop it over the transition to tell the transition a bit more. So once I've done this, I'm going to right click it, go to change clip speed, and then I'm going to drop it down to 50%. Now from here, I'm going to go down to the bottom and I'm going to select the little music icon, which is the Fairlight tab. In here, I can adjust the audio. Now what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to change the pitch, just to make it a bit lower. So I'm going to go over to the left hand side and I'm going to select pitch and drop that on. Then from here, I'm going to make sure the output is set to wet, and I'm going to drop all the other options far to the left. And this is going to give me a really low pitch sound like this. Once we've done that, we can go back into the editing tab along the bottom and see what it sounds like. Once I'm happy with the sound, I can just make any final adjustments and make sure I've got the transition in the place I want. Once I've done that, I'm going to right click on it and press copy. I'm going to drag over to the other transition and press paste, Ctrl V, and I'm going to drop it in here and then see what this sounds like now. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Next, I want to add some background music. For this again, I've gone to the YouTube audio library and I found a piece called Timeless by the Slender Beats. Once I've dropped this onto the timeline, I'm then going to drag the end in so it's the same length as my video. and then I'm going to adjust it to the appropriate volume. To do this, I can click on the audio track and then click on the white bar to raise the volume up and down. I'm then going to do the same thing on my sound effects to make sure they're nicely balanced and that I'm happy with how it sounds. Once I'm happy with this, I'm going to go down to the color grading tab down the bottom, and then I'm going to color grade it to how I require. Now I'm going to do a more in-depth video on how to color grade later on, so if you're interested in that, hit that subscribe button and that bell icon and you'll know as soon as it comes out. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm using these wheels to make the highlights a bit brighter. I'm then going to click on the graph, and by putting a little S shape in, this is going to boost the contrast. I'm going to go back into the wheels, and I'm going to click on the little 2 down here. I'm going to push the color temperature to the right to make it a bit more orange. And then I'm going to go into the shadows, put a little bit of blue in there, and then I'm going to go into the highlights and put a little bit of yellow in there. As I say, I will go over this in more detail in a later video, so if that interests you, just keep your eye out. Now I'm happy with this color grade, I'm going to right click on it and press grab still, and then I get this little icon in the top left hand corner. Then I can click on the next scene and then go up to the top right hand corner and press apply grade and do the same for the next one, and all 3 will be exactly the same color gradient. So now if we watch it through, it looks like this. The last thing I want to do is export it, so again I'm going to go down to the tabs at the bottom and go to deliver. I'm going to rename it to transition and then select the folder location. I'm then going to scroll down, export it as an MP4, and I'm going to leave the rest of the settings as they are, and then I'm going to press add to render queue. Once that's done, I can press start render, and this will start putting the video together. Once it's finished rendering, we can then open the video file, and this is what it looks like. Okay guys, so this video should have taken you from beginning to end for everything you need to do to make a transition like the one you've seen here. If you do have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below, and I'll be happy to go over them when I can. Now if you have enjoyed this video, hitting that like button is a huge help to me as a creator, and I hope to see you in the next one.